Cover Killer Nation, I come to you today in my work clothes to show to you that I'm not only a working man, but I'm a member of the working class. Today I'm going to be talking about a guy who has been writing songs about the working man, the working class, the common man, and the little man for now roughly 4 decades. That man is Bruce Springsteen, and the album that we're going to be speaking about today is due out on March the 6th, which is tomorrow, or if you're viewing this after March the 6th, it's already passed. It's entitled Wrecking Ball. Bruce Springsteen has been an artist, along with his E Street Band, that has very prominent success, and has done so pretty much ever since he first hit the scene. He's had career ups and downs, however he's considered to be one of the most important songwriters of all time by Rolling Stone magazine. Bruce Springsteen, or as his nickname goes, the Boss, was also going to be experiencing some personal turmoil whenever writing this album, considering they had lost a very key part to the E Street Band, and that was Clarance Clemmons, the triumphant saxophone player that had accompanied them for years and years and had become a fixture to the band, almost a titular figure, just like Bruce himself was. This is a loss that they endured with heavy hearts. However, Wrecking Ball is an album that is less about stories about what Bruce Springsteen was able to craft, in his mind. Instead, he's taking a nice hard look at America as it is right now. He's seeking economic justice with this album. It's probably his most raw and angry album to date. Now, Bruce Springsteen has never been a guy that's been all that calm. However, he's been able to write, songs that aren't this searing. In fact, this is easily the album in which Bruce's rage, Bruce's horns, so to speak, really come out. Now, of course, the music itself doesn't reflect it as though it were a metal record or anything like that. Instead, he's able to do so through the use of prominent metaphor, through prominent simile, through great poetry, poetic lyrics, and music that suits. The music that suits for him is a lot different than what we're used to here on the Cover Killer Nation channel. This is instead arena rock that has a really folky Americana, very heartland rock style to it. Something that really, whenever you think of America, and some of you who view America from abroad may not have the best of ideas of what America is like, or may not have the best of opinions on America, well, that's kind of what you think about. You think about a guy like Bruce Springsteen, who really parades around the attitude that we're America, and we're the greatest country on earth. However, Bruce Springsteen goes about this a little bit differently than 99% of the country artists that inhabit this wretched country. Instead, he tells stories about the working man, the man who's poor and destitute, that does odd jobs just to kind of get by, and sits back and kind of wonders during his downtime while drinking perhaps a small glass of whiskey why it is that he works so hard but yet never seems to get anywhere. Where's his American dream? Has his American dream died? Has his hometown also died? Is it something that's completely a memory, something of the past? These are all songs that really cater to what I consider to be the greatest generation of music purchasers, music consumers. And that would be the 1970s to mid-1990s crowd. Not to take anything away from you guys, but let's face it, that's the era in which music was something that was purchased by one and all, instead of being downloaded or instead of being used on Spotify or iTunes or something like that. This is something where this generation really understands the physical ownership, the collective principle of music. Not to mention this also applies to a great deal of Americans. This is songs really for the middle class. Before, it used to be songs for the lower and the middle class. However, in recent memory, especially around this area, which I'll get to in a second, these are really songs that are more geared toward the middle class. Why is that? Because economic justice is something that the middle class constantly seeks. Why the middle? Why not the lower class? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the lower class is coddled by the government, and the upper class is coddled by the government. And Bruce Springsteen, he's not liking that. He's also not liking the fact that the corporate fat cats are lining their pockets basically by becoming thieves, by becoming criminals. He writes a song on this album where he compares them to gangsters, where they turn to crime just to keep their profits going, which is, well, a brilliant metaphor for the scandals that happened in the early part of this decade. And it's also a brilliant metaphor for the constant bailouts that America had to endure during the first part of Barack Obama's presidency. He's not being overly critical of Obama. Instead, the searing anger is for the overall state of the country that was perhaps caused or indirectly caused by prior administrations, by corporations, bad decision making, and just an overall I guess, American veneer that has been kind of crafted in a post-9/11 world. This is something where he understands that anybody would be willing to answer the call. However, whenever he says anybody, he means anybody in the middle or lower class that is expected to, instead of the people that are in the upper class, or the corporate fat cats, or members of the government and Congress, that instead value their lives and value their jobs, and would rather send people to play the war games for them. Bruce is able to do this with a number of different musical treats. This is something where he's able to throw in a couple of different ideas. With the departure of Clarance, may he rest in peace, it didn't really open up a new window, but it just seemed like Bruce was kind of willing to tinker a little bit. And I don't want to say that Clarance was the responsibility, or was the reason for that, rather. But instead, Bruce just kind of had some different ideas to present on this record. To the point where he's doing something that sounds like an Irish wake on one track, and then he's sampling and using drum loops or maybe a synth on another track, and then has a choir going on another track. Now, granted, there are going to be some elements of God in his work, but that's because God has been a part of America since, well, Plymouth Rock. So, it's just something that Americans have to understand. And most of us do. Those of us who don't and actually express our religious freedom, well, there you go. Another part of what makes America great, but at the same time damns it, considering a lot of people are not very friendly toward people that aren't Christian. C'est la vie. This is an album that is full of outrage. But the outrage is done, as I had mentioned earlier, in a very poetic fashion. The music is able to swirl around it very nicely, to blend and make a nice picture. Not a paint by number, but instead an impressionistic piece that's fit and ripened with Americana, something that has a very destitute glow to it, but at the same time there is still a glow. He's not necessarily saying that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, folks, but at the same time he is saying that change needs to happen in order for this country to regain its status as the greatest country on earth. If we want to make that claim, we have to show it. And he's saying that we're not showing it. Economic injustice isn't showing it. Turmoil from a war that we probably should not have stayed in is not showing it. Instead, we've shown ourselves as proverbial bullies that are willing to rob and steal from other countries as well as our own people. Our morals are in the toilet, and let's face it, whenever it comes to our culture, we are pretty much culturally bankrupt. We live in a country where sports figures can hit balls with sticks or throw them and make millions of dollars, but yet a gentleman who builds a house, or somebody who goes up to the space, or goes up onto the space station, or somebody who fights for our freedom, only makes mere thousands. Bruce is very, very aware that this is an album that may stir the pot. And this is an album that I think does so quite nicely. This is an album that flows seamlessly. The one problem I always had with Bruce Springsteen was that I heard him live and heard his albums is that too much of it just seemed like too much. You just didn't want to hear all that Bruce Springsteen. You wanted to kind of have a little bit of a break, and it made getting through his albums sometimes a challenge. With Wrecking Ball, I think it's because I mirror his sentiments in some regard. That's not a problem that I have. And that's not a problem that a lot of people are going to have. This album flows together very nicely, and it is filled with enough variety to really invigorate the spirit and kind of keep you enthralled. I enjoyed this record for what it's worth. I think it's a solid 8 out of 10, or some people would call it a 4 out of 5. I really think that this is one that showcases its variety, but also the ferocity that Bruce Springsteen is able to emanate in his vocals and his poetry, along with the music, is just brilliantly structured and very well timed. This is a very nicely timed album. Overall, I think this is going to be a bona fide Springsteen classic. I believe that people are going to be looking at this album and hopefully seeing and sensing change in the coming days. Whenever an artist such as Bruce Springsteen voices his opinion of outrage, things do tend to happen. Thank you guys. I'm Cover Killer Nation, and this is easily the most political review that I've ever done. Like it or hate it, thank you for watching.